12,000 men, a desert plateau, and 2 miles away, water. They can see it. Lake Tiberias, blue and cold, shimmering below the ridge. They have been marching since dawn in full armor under a July sun. Their mouths are cracked, their horses are trembling. Knights, the elite warriors of the medieval world, are on their knees in the dirt. The commander does not stop. His name is Guy of Lusignan, King of Jerusalem, and in the next 18 hours, he will make the single worst military decision in the history of the Crusader states. He will lead his army away from the water, not because he is reckless, because one man whispered the right words into his ear at exactly the right moment, and that man, Saladin, had been engineering this moment for years. On the ridge ahead, between two volcanic hills called the Horns of Hattin, the trap is already closed. Nobody in the column knows it yet. But Jerusalem, the most contested city on earth, has already fallen. To understand why 12,000 soldiers walked into a death trap, you have to understand what the Crusader Kingdom was by 1187. Outremer, the land beyond the sea, had survived for nearly 90 years on a knife's edge. A strip of territory along the eastern Mediterranean, surrounded on all sides, held together by one thing: the refusal to appear weak. Weakness invited attack. Hesitation invited annihilation. Guy of Lusignan had been king for less than 2 years. He married into the throne. The nobility despised him. His most powerful rival, Raymond of Tripoli, had openly refused to recognize his authority. Guy was brave in the way lesser men are brave. He would charge, he would hold, he would endure. But he had one fatal flaw that Saladin had identified years before they ever met. Guy could not say no to the wrong people. Saladin had spent a decade building toward this moment. Born in Tikrit, Kurdish by origin, he had united Egypt and Syria into a single military force pointing directly at Jerusalem. He was not simply a conqueror. He was a surgeon who had spent years studying his patient before picking up the knife. He knew the terrain, the passes, the roads, the desperate dependence on a handful of water sources in an otherwise arid landscape. He knew the politics, the factions, the rivalries, the men whose pride was larger than their judgment, and he had identified the one weapon that could destroy the Crusader army without a frontal assault: the landscape itself, the heat, the thirst. In the spring of 1187, he found his opening. He crossed the Jordan River with 30,000 men and besieged Tiberias, a town on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, held by Raymond of Tripoli's wife. This was not a military objective. It was a message, a provocation, precisely calibrated to force the Crusader army into the open, onto terrain of Saladin's choosing, in the worst possible season. The trap was not set at Hattin. It was set in a war council chamber in Acre the night before the march. The night of July 2nd, 1187. The city of Acre, oil lamps. The senior commanders of the kingdom gathered to answer one question: do we march to relieve Tiberias, or do we wait? Raymond of Tripoli speaks first. What he says is remarkable, not because it is brave, but because it is cold. Tiberias is his city. Esheva is his wife. And he is telling the king to leave them both to Saladin. Do not march, he says. The army of Jerusalem is the last force standing between Saladin and the entire kingdom. If it is destroyed, nothing stops him. Tiberias can be retaken. Jerusalem cannot. The march to Tiberias is 18 miles across waterless exposed terrain in July heat. Saladin's skirmishers will harass the column every step of the way. The knights will want to charge. They will not be able to. They will arrive exhausted and broken at the end of a road where 30,000 rested soldiers are waiting. Every detail, every danger. He lays it all out with the precision of a man who has spent his life fighting in this landscape. The room is silent. Then Renaud of Chatillon stands up. He is older, louder, and operates entirely on the principle that aggression is its own argument. He looks at Raymond and delivers the killing blow. He calls him a coward, a man who negotiated a private truce with the enemy, who now counsels surrender when his own wife's city burns. Not a strategist, a traitor. The word lands in a room full of knights, men who have built their entire identities around the concept of martial honor. To be called a coward in front of your peers is not an insult. It is a social death sentence. Guy of Lusignan feels the room shift. Later that night, after the formal council, Gerard of Ridefort, the Grand Master of the Knights Templar and Raymond's bitterest enemy, goes to the king's chambers alone. What he says is not recorded. When morning comes, Guy has made his decision. The army will march. Raymond learns at dawn. He does not argue. He simply rejoins the column. He will march with the army he told the king not to send. He will watch his own advice be ignored, and he will be there at the end when everything he predicted comes true. The army that assembles outside Acre on July 3rd is the largest force the Crusader Kingdom has ever fielded. 1,200 knights, 10,000 infantry. They carry a cross, a relic of enormous symbolic weight, the kingdom's identity made physical. They have water at the start. The plan: reach the springs at Sephri by nightfall, rest, and continue to Tiberias the next day. It is not a terrible plan on paper, but Saladin has not been reading the same paper. The first arrows come before the column clears the valley. Not a charge, not a battle line, just arrows. From the hills, from men on fast horses who appear, release, and vanish. A skirmisher tactic as old as warfare, but the Crusaders have never faced it at this scale, with this precision, with this patience. Saladin's Turkish horse archers are not trying to break the formation. They are bleeding it, arrow by arrow, man by man. A slow, methodical hemorrhage designed not to kill the army outright, but to push it past rational thought. The knights want to charge. This is the crisis Saladin has engineered. The entire psychology of a Crusader knight is built around the charge. Armored horses at full speed, shock contact, collapse. It is the one thing they do better than anyone, and it is completely useless against an enemy that will not stand still. Raymond rides near the front. He recognizes the pattern. He sends word back: hold formation. Do not charge. Keep moving. The column holds, barely. Then the smoke starts. The dry hillside grass ignites. Torches from Saladin's men positioned in advance. The air temperature, already above 40 degrees, climbs. Men in iron armor cook from the outside in. The horses panic. The skirmishers pour arrows into the gaps as the formation loses its shape. By midday, men are cutting open the water skins of the dead to drink what remains. Here is what thirst does to a soldier. It starts as discomfort. Within 2 hours in extreme heat, it becomes pressure behind the eyes, weight in the limbs, degraded judgment. By hour 4, a man in armor under the July sun is no longer fully rational. He is operating on instinct. And instinct says one thing: find water. This is the weapon Saladin has deployed. Not arrows, not cavalry. thirst. The Hospitallers at the rear send an urgent message forward. We cannot hold. We need the cavalry to charge or the rear collapses. Raymond sends back the only rational answer. Hold. We are almost at Turan. They hold. The arrows keep coming. The column compresses, stretches, loses its shape. Then, a crossroads. Left, the road to Turan, to water, to the plan. Still possible, barely, if the column holds 2 more hours. Right, a track toward the village of Marascalia, toward the Sea of Galilee. Closer. Not the plan, not the safe route. Someone turns right. Whether it is an order or a collapse of discipline, the chroniclers disagree. What they agree on? Once the first unit turned, others followed. And by the time anyone with authority tried to reverse it, half the army was already moving in the wrong direction. Raymond gets the message at the front. He turns his horse. He looks back at the mass of men no longer marching toward water, but falling toward a volcanic plateau above the lake with no exits and no cover. The army is not marching anymore. It is falling, and the place where it lands has a name. The army stops on the plateau as the sun goes down, not because anyone ordered a halt, because it cannot go further. Men drop where they stand. Knights lie in armor, too exhausted to remove it. Horses stand with their heads down. The supply train has been partially overrun. The fires Saladin set are still burning on the hillsides below, and smoke drifts through the camp. Guy of Lusignan makes a decision. They will camp here, resume the march at dawn. Raymond says nothing. The moment for words was 36 hours ago in Acre. What he knows, what he cannot say without destroying whatever remains of the army's will, is that there will be no march at dawn, because Saladin will not allow it. Even now, in the darkness, 30,000 men are repositioning in silence. Units flow around the plateau with the efficiency of a force that has been preparing for this exact moment for years. By midnight, every exit is sealed, every road blocked, every path to water cut off. The trap has closed, completely, silently, without a single major engagement. Inside the camp, the night is its own torture. Severe dehydration after a full day of maximum exertion in extreme heat. Muscle cramps that wake men screaming, headaches like hot coals behind the eyes. Confusion that makes standing unexpectedly difficult. The horses are worse. By morning, many will be unable to carry a rider at more than a walk. Then Saladin's men do something specific and deliberate. They carry water to the shore of the lake below. They pour it on the ground. They make the sounds of water being handled, sounds that carry up the hillside to the camp above. Men who are already at the edge of endurance hear water and break. Some try to leave and are driven back by arrows. Some weep. Some press their faces to their armor and lick the dew from the metal. These are the elite warriors of the medieval world, on their hands and knees in the dark, licking moisture from iron. This is what Saladin understood. War is not just fought with swords, it is fought with logistics, with geography, with the patient manipulation of an enemy's environment until the environment becomes the weapon. Guy sits in his tent. He receives assessments. They are uniformly catastrophic. He waits for dawn anyway. Outside, 12,000 men wait with him, surrounded by fire and enemies, listening to water they cannot reach. It will be the last night most of them ever see. Dawn breaks like a verdict. The sun clears the eastern hills and hits the camp immediately, totally, without mercy. Guy emerges from his tent and looks at his army. The infantry cannot fight. They stand in loose clusters, cracked and shaking. Several are already lying down and not getting up. The plan: the cavalry charges south toward the lake. The infantry follows. Break the encirclement. Reach the water. Survive. Raymond leads the van, the most dangerous position. The man who told them not to march now leads the charge to save it. He forms 200 knights into a line, horses trembling but upright. He looks at Saladin's lines, dense, disciplined, 10 rows deep. He lowers his lance. He charges. Raymond's charge reaches the line. And the line opens, not breaks, opens deliberately. A corridor appears, and Raymond's knights ride through at full gallop. They reach the other side. The corridor closes behind them. Raymond turns his horse. He sees the battle on the plateau. The infantry still trapped, the cavalry in a shrinking circle, the red tent of Guy somewhere in the chaos. He cannot go back. 200 knights against 30,000 is not a charge. It is suicide that saves no one. Raymond of Tripoli rides away from Hattin. He will be called a coward for 8 centuries. Saladin opened that corridor deliberately to remove the one commander capable of organizing a retreat. Raymond understood this and chose survival. The argument does not matter to the men he left behind. The remaining cavalry charges again and again. Each time the formation absorbs the blow, gives ground, closes from the sides. Each charge shorter than the last. Each one launched by horses a little closer to collapse. The infantry breaks for the horns, the 2 volcanic hills at the plateau's edge. Instinct, high ground. They scramble up, abandoning equipment, abandoning wounded. Saladin's archers follow from below. Men die climbing. Guy watches from the center. Around him, the royal guard fights in a shrinking circle. The red tent goes down. It is raised. It goes down again. It is raised again. It goes down a 3rd time. It is not raised again. The circle contracts to nothing. Knights fight on foot, backs together, swords the last weapons left. Then they stop, not surrender. Their bodies simply stop. Men sit down in the middle of the field and do not get up. Guy of Lusignan surrenders. The true cross is taken from a dead man's hands. It will never be recovered. 3,000 Crusaders killed, nearly 9,000 taken prisoner. Damascus runs out of rope to bind them. Guy is brought before Saladin. The Sultan offers him a cup of water, iced, chilled with snow from Mount Hermon. Guy drinks. He passes the cup to Renaud of Chatillon. Saladin stops the cup. In the customs of the time, offering a prisoner water implied safe conduct. Saladin offered it to Guy, not to Renaud. The distinction is deliberate and final. He recites quietly. The list of truces broken, caravans attacked, promises violated. He draws his sword. He kills Renaud of Chatillon himself. A sworn promise kept with absolute patience at the moment of his greatest victory. He turns back to Guy, calm, courteous. Kings do not kill kings. Jerusalem falls 88 days later. No battle. The garrison is a skeleton. The army that should have defended the city died on a plateau above a lake. The city that the Crusaders held for 88 years surrenders on October 2nd, 1187. The Third Crusade follows. Richard of England, Philip of France, the greatest coalition ever assembled. They will not fully succeed. Jerusalem is never permanently recovered. The final Crusader city falls in 1291. It all traces back to one plateau, one cup of water, one red tent not raised a 3rd time. Here is what happened in that council chamber in Acre. One man stood up and told the truth with complete clarity. Do not march. The terrain will kill us. Saladin is waiting. We will lose. He was right about every single thing. Nobody listened. Not because the argument was weak, it was the strongest in the room. Not because the man was untrustworthy, he was the most experienced commander in the kingdom. They did not listen because another man stood up and called him a coward. Because the word landed in a room full of men who had built their identities on courage. Because Guy of Lusignan made the calculation that every weak leader eventually makes, that appearing strong in the short term is worth the risk of being wrong in the long term. It was not worth it. Saladin did not defeat the Crusader Kingdom at Hattin. The Crusader Kingdom defeated itself. In a room, the night before the march. Saladin simply arrived to collect what pride had already surrendered. 12,000 men walked into a desert because one king could not bear to be called a coward. Jerusalem fell because of a word.